Hi guys, over on beastsofwar.com for our Backstagers, we have an episode up right now where we're looking at the impact of this whole Gathering Storm story on the 40k universe. We're looking specifically at the repercussions of the fall of Cadia. All roads lead back to Terra. So we're going to be looking at the Primarchs, who we think's coming back, who we think isn't. It's an interesting one, so come across to beastsofwar.com, check it out.
Progress comes to a world of magic as science and the arcane combine to make marvels. Meet steampunk inventors and orc mystics at the Volsun Hub on beastsofwar.com. From Viking halls to the cities of the future, terrain buffs will love our foreground hub. Watch gaming tables of all genres come to life at beastsofwar.com.
I'm Warren, a huge fan of tabletop games, but few games out there have a story so deep as Warhammer 40k. I'm setting out to explore this vast universe and the game with my trusty guide, AJ. So join us on Warhammer 40k Charted.
Hi guys, welcome to 40k Charted. Right. Recently, I've been saying to AJ, we're exploring this whole narrative thing of Warhammer 40k. And I was saying to AJ that one of my favorite things in games of 40k are the watercooler moments. Those kinds of interesting, special things that you've done that you end up talking about after the game. Because let's be honest, shooting and combat and stuff like that, we do that almost every turn of every game. Yeah. So I asked AJ, can you help me find more things that I can do that can create these kind of watercooler moments?
Mm-hmm. Well, instantly, the one that always comes to mind right away is tank shock. Mm-hmm. Everyone loves driving their tanks full speed forward at the enemy, and it's probably the most cinematic thing in 40k. Yeah. You've got these lumbering behemoths coming right at you, getting all up in your grill, right on top of you. So I thought, what perfect way to kind of start off the kind of series, looking at these kind of watercooler moments.
Okay. Now, I've got to say, as regards tank shock, okay, I've always found tank shock to be, well, fairly limited, to be honest. I always seem to just have troops move out of the way and stuff like that. So I'm particularly interested on whether you can convince me that tank shocking is something that I need to be more aware of in my games.
Okay. One of the reasons tank shock is so brilliant is sometimes we find that our vehicles are ineffective at shooting. For example, if we've been hit with crew shaking, our vehicles might only be snap firing. With the likes of the Manticore, which we've got here, pull that up there. Likes of the Manticore, it's got limited shots. It's only got four missiles. So what do you do after turn 4? Because let's face it, you've used it by turn 4. So what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. There's not. It can't carry anything.
Can't carry it. It's got a heavy bolter, but
use it as rolling cover.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is all I can think of. Yeah.
So what about just charging it at the enemy? Obviously, by this point in the game, maybe they're trying to push on objectives, and tank shock is a great way to kind of, as you say, kind of moves troops away, but it can clear those objectives as well.
I was thinking about troops moving out of the way as a bad thing. It hadn't occurred to me about using it as a way of moving troops deliberately out of the way. Because I've got to say, AJ, whenever I'm thinking tank shock, I'm thinking kill. I want to just squish the little dudes.
Well, we'll get to that a little bit later on because that is also an option open to us. But for now, I just wanted us to have a really quick look at the basic mechanic of tank shock so that we can kind of get into the fun of it, maybe.
Grand.
Okay. So
well, we have our table set up. You'll see the red Orktober has been coming into play on this. We have a bit of a city set up, so as you can see, point out what we've got going on here, AJ.
So we've kind of setting up that scenario. Our Manticore, it's run out of shots, and it's being beared down upon by the Fire Warriors. Now the Fire Warriors, with their strength of their weapons currently, they could get round the side, get round the back, have a good chance of giving it a good run for its money. Might even take off a couple of hull points, even destroy it. So would the Imperial commander allow it just to sit there and be destroyed?
No, absolutely
I think not. So what it would do in this situation is, at the start of our movement phase, we would try and push the Tau back. Obviously, maybe further on down the line here, we have the kind of Imperial defense line situation. So we don't want these guys getting any closer along. So when at the start of the tank shock, what we do is we pre-measure. It's one of the great things about 40k, which changed certainly from 5th edition, is that you can pre-measure everything. You can, from the start of your turn, you can measure anywhere on the board. So what we do is we lay it down and work out how many inches we have to go. So this vehicle can move 6 inches at combat speed. So if you move 6 inches, you'd still be able to use that heavy boulder. But it can move right up to 12 inches. Now the only limitation is that a vehicle that moves, performs a tank shock, can't move flat out, so it doesn't get its extra 6-inch move in the shooting phase if it wants. But for now, I think these guys are fairly close. So let's maybe nominate our 6 inches, because that'll still force them that wee bit back. Okay. So what we would do is we would move, I think it's about 5 inches. We would move our 5 inches up to engage the tow. And when we come close to base, what we do is the tow would then take a leadership check. Do you want to take that leadership check?
Absolutely, I will. So, let's see.
So they passed. Tow, the squad commander usually has a leadership of about 8. So they passed. So what they would do is they'd simply, as you say, move outside of 1 inch. Okay. Rather underwhelming, isn't it?
It is a bit, yes.
4 ends. Let's now take the other side of the coin. If they had a field, they would have fallen back 2d6.
Okay, so I'll roll that. 2 inches.
So again,
rather
underwhelming result.
This is me in tank shock. This is what I typically find happens.
No. Yeah, that's quite rather underwhelming. However, maybe one gentleman out of this squad might decide to go for the death or glory.
Yes.
Okay, this is when tank shock gets that little bit more interesting. So let's imagine that our fire warrior has an EMP grenade. Now, an EMP grenade is a grenade that works quite well against vehicles, actually. So this maybe wasn't the wisest decision in the world to do. An EMP grenade is basically has the haywire special rule. Haywire looks basically when used against a vehicle on a 1 does nothing. On a 2 to 5 would cause a hull point, so it would cause a glancing hit. But on a 6, it would actually cause a penetrating hit. Okay. Now our death or glory, our brave, plucky young fire warrior here, he's performing his death or glory attack. He automatically gets to hit. Okay. But he only ever gets 1 hit. So even if he was firing, say, a grav cannon with 6 shots or whatever, a heavy grav cannon with 6 shots, he would still only get 1 with that weapon strength profile. Okay? So, our death or glory is about to take place. Let's see what the result can...
Okay. A 6.
Ooh, so he gets the penetrating hit. And roll again to see what he gets on the penetrating table.
Okay, let's do that. Oh, cocked. Let's try it again. A 2.
Okay, so it's basically shaken. Okay, so he would still die because it would need to basically get rid of stop the tank from moving. So if the tank becomes stunned, becomes immobilized, or of course explodes or is wrecked, then the tank would stop away from him. However, in this instance, the tank has driven right over the top of him, taken a hull point, but is shaken, so it will only be able to snap fire. So you can kill and be killed with tank shock. So that's kind of the basic mechanic around tank shock.
So let me recap that, right? If they had failed that leadership test at the start, what would have happened?
They would have had to make a fallback maneuver.
Okay, which is D6 inches...
2d6
inches straight back.
Straight back,
Okay. So they passed their leadership, and then what was the second roll in that they took after their leadership?
After the leadership, then, if they pass it, they just move outside 1 inch of the vehicle. But if they fail it, they fall back those 2d6 inches.
Okay, right.
But you always get that opportunity, if you pass your leadership, to make that death or glory attack.
And that guy, in this instance, died because...
He basically stood in the path of the tank.
Uh-huh.
He used his grenade. He tried to stick it to the maybe the tracks, or tried to stop the tank from bearing down on his squad.
Yeah.
And unfortunately got crushed underneath its tracks in the process.
And what were the circumstances where he wouldn't have died then?
If he had destroyed the vehicle.
So he had to destroy the vehicle outright.
Destroy
not
the
die.
vehicle or immobilize it,
Mhm.
or stun it where it no longer moves.
If he was in a unit that was under half strength and he died as a result of that, would I then have to take a leadership test or something after that?
Yeah, if you suffer any more than 20... So say there was 4 guys left in the squad,
Yeah.
and he died, well, that would be 25% casualties.
So I would have to take it. Right, that's okay. I'm just making sure.
You only take 1 leadership test per phase.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's try another little scenario.
Yeah.
So in the previous turn, our plucky Imperial Guardsmen, who are somewhere in this vicinity off the board,
Somewhere over here.
somewhere
Yeah.
over here,
Mhm.
have actually caused our Fire Warriors to run away.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, because they're over half strength, they are still likely to rally at some point. However, if a unit tank shocks a unit, if a vehicle tank shocks a unit that's already fallen back, it continues to make it fall back further. Okay. So it's basically like chasing them down and kind of keeping them moving along. So again, it's a great way to kind of get a unit off the board.
So if you have a unit that's fleeing, then is your opportunity to use your tank to try and keep them fleeing.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Mhm.
So our tank does the same thing again. We measure in, so gain roughly about 6 inches. But this time, rather than getting to make your leadership tech, you simply keep running. So
so I don't even get to take a leadership test this time.
They're still petrified, and they're just going to run for it.
So it's right. Well, let's see what we got here. So 6.
So 6 inches. So that would force our toy even further away.
And if that was getting near a board edge, that's starting to get quite nasty.
Well, there's only, I mean, for example, there's only another 6 inches to the edge of that board. So it's highly likely that next turn they could disappear off the edge of the board.
And if I keep the tank chasing after them, they don't get the opportunity.
They don't get the opportunity to rally. They would get it.
They get it in their turn.
In their turn.
But if they fail, I just roll up, and there's no leadership test. They're just
exactly. And even if they pass
like that,
even if they pass that leadership in their turn, they can still only snap fire when they rally.
Yeah.
And they can't move. Now they might be able to run.
So there's a reason to keep your rhinos and stuff like that close to engagements and to troops that are laying down fire. Because if you do manage to cause something to start to flee, you can utilize. I think you could use a rhino or any vehicle.
Yeah, any tank.
Any tank.
It specifically states tank.
Right. So anything that's classified as a tank
has to have the tank designation.
Okay.
Although I believe Ork Rams, if you give a vehicle an Ork Ram, that upgrades it to be allowed to tank shock.
Yeah, so it becomes a tank profile. Right. What's next then, AJ? What else? What other things can we do with it?
What we'll do now is we'll look at a slight variation on this. I'll actually swap vehicles for this. We'll keep those vehicles, but we'll set up something slightly different.
Okay, so
How are we looking in the camera?
So what have we got now? So we have the Manticore coming down this channel here, and then you have a Lehman Russ.
A Lehman Russ Punisher
chucked in there. So okay.
So quite often we have situations where units sort of stay out of line of sight.
Yeah.
And do this basically so that they can't be seen. Now, usually on a gaming table, you'd probably have a lot more space for this.
Yeah.
But that's just for the sake of it, imagine that we're kind of have a bit more room.
Okay.
Okay. So.
Right. So let's see what you've set up here. So we have some Dark Eldar guys tucked in behind this building. Now, normally what I would find is, especially those guys on the bikes, the jet bikes and stuff, they would be tucked in behind cover. They'd pop out, do some shooting, and then kind of pop back into the cover.
Yeah.
So they're always a pain in the butt for me.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I start kind of having to maneuver myself around and maneuver my army around to try and see if I can get a shot at them. But a lot of the time, anytime I maneuver, he just maneuvers it deeper back into the cover or kind of angles himself.
Or just disappears across the board edge.
Yeah.
So what Tank Shock is great for is, Tank Shock is the only time, pretty much in your entire turn, where you can force the enemy to move in your movement phase.
Oh.
So it's the only time where you can actually manipulate where a unit's going if you Tank Shock
Of your enemy.
Of your enemy.
Actually, I never thought of it like that. I never thought of it like that. See, again, I'm just thinking of running people over and trying to kill them. But I'm obviously repeating you here, but yeah, it's the only time that I can force my enemy to move in my movement phase.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hang on a second.
Because otherwise, you can't move within 1 inch of an enemy model.
Yeah.
Except for Tank Shock. And even if they pass their test, they have to move outside of 1 inch of where your tank is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So depending on how close you are, you can get them to move at least an inch.
Mm-hmm. Which might be, for example, like in this situation, might just be enough to push them into the field of fire of the Punisher.
So these guys here. Right. Show me.
Okay.
Show me.
So again, we would pre-measure.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've placed the Manticore now, obviously on a gaming table. It would be quite hard to get this situation.
Yeah.
But just imagine that we're on a different board edge. What you would do is you would be looking for the point where the closest distance, or the shortest distance they have to move, is towards the item that you want to shoot them at.
So this is the vector you want to come in on to make sure that, because they have to move directly away from you, yeah?
Yeah.
So you've got to angle your
vehicle.
attack to vector it into the right position. Okay.
So, for example, if I placed my tank here and came at them from there, they might be able to go that way and push further into the
So they might be able to go this way.
Yeah, further away from my Punisher. However, if I just angle it ever so lightly, like this, and I was to come across the difficult terrain, now I would have to take a difficult terrain test. Which I pass. So that's okay. He would come straight forward, and I would nominate probably my full distance, so I would probably say 11 inches there. Yeah, 11 inches. So that would bring me right up tight with this this building here. And as you can see, once I come into engagement, the shortest way for them to get out of the way isn't past the vehicle this way, but it's actually out into the open this way.
Oh.
Right into the gun sights.
And what that has done is put them in direct line of fire with the Punisher. And this was all done in the Imperial Guard's movement phase, which means that they still have their shooting phase, so they can now punish those guys. I've been thinking about this all wrong. I have been thinking about Tank Shock completely wrong. So, right, so to recap what I've learned here, Tank Shock isn't about running guys over and squishing them.
Not always.
Not always, but Tank Shock is specifically about being able to exact some control over your opponent to move units strategically where I want them. So either running them off the board if I get the opportunity to, so to always be aware of units that are likely to have to be taking leadership tests, or that I know that I'm going to put enough firepower on them to hopefully enact a leadership test, that if they fail it, I have a tank vehicle nearby to try and force them off the board, or to force them out of play, or to force them into another unit where I could maybe then, is it a sweeping advance then, or potentially, or
exactly,
something?
Yeah, it's catching them in that crossfire, or catching them in a combat maybe that they would have maybe been just too far away from, or any of those things.
More specifically though, and what has never occurred to me before, is using Tank Shock as a means of pressurizing units that otherwise their movement I have no control over, and they're causing me annoyance. I can in some way set up a trap, set up some kind of an ambush, and then push them into the way of an ambush. Equally, I could use it as a means of trying to push them off an objective.
Exactly, yeah.
And hopefully, preferably off an objective and into an ambush.
And again, it is keeping it's more than anything about keeping that pressure on the enemy.
Yeah.
For example, if our Manticore was out of weapons, it's really kind of useless to us anyway. So using that vehicle to put pressure on an enemy, for example, the Fire Warriors, which might have had the turn to regroup, settle themselves in, and then return fire. Now they don't have that time.
Yeah.
And we're just constantly keeping pressure. Or you might find that the tank shocks an enemy unit. The enemy unit holds. It might lose a guy maybe through death or glory. But now that unit kind of has a couple of choices to make. It might have to move out of the way of the tank to get line of sight when it tries to return fire, which if you're, say, for example, a Devastator squad or heavy weapon squad, you don't really want to be moving. Or it might force them to actually target the tank, which might not be an optimum target. For example, why would you want to target a Manticore that has no weapons if, for example, there's 2 Lemonruss with battle cannons just about to bear down on you?
So it's all about, once again, either in forcing your will upon your opponent or forcing your opponent to have to make choices he doesn't want to make.
Exactly.
Nasty stuff. Nasty stuff. Anything else for Tank Shock, or are we done?
No, we've got one more thing to look at with Tank Shock. Because, you can be sneaky and subtle and try and force your enemy into maneuvering as you like. But then, of course, you could do what all good Imperial Guard commanders do and use a super heavy.
Yep.
So
I love me super heavies. Okay.
The super heavy has a few benefits to its tank shocking ability. Now, obviously, it's a lot bigger.
Yeah.
It's generally a lot faster while still keeping up its shooting ability.
Yep.
But it also has this wonderful thing called the Thunder Blitz.
The Thunder Blitz.
Okay. Now, the Thunder Blitz basically replaces its tank shock. And the Thunder Blitz kind of is a table.
Give me a page number.
Page number is 95.
95 in the main rulebook.
On page number 95 on the main rulebook. So I'll just bring her back our poor toy.
Yeah, you don't look so smarmy now, Tal.
You don't look as happy. What new codex? Hey. So again, I'm going to nominate a tank shock against the toy.
Yeah.
This time I'm going to try and move my full distance. Because, well, we're super heavy and we don't really care.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's maybe say... Well, actually, let's say 9 inches. Okay. We have moved through cover, so we're not really that bothered about the terrain because we're super heavy. So we're just going to move right up to the toy.
Okay.
Okay, the toy.
That must be the most terrifying sight for a Tau. That's it.
Now, usually at this point, we would take our morale check, they'd see, and then they'd move out of the way. Yeah. However, the Thunder Blitz gives us some advantages, and it's basically this table here. Okay, so on a D6, good sir. On a 1, there's no effect, so you resolve the tank shock as normal. On a 2 to 5, it's called Crunch. The unit being tank shocked. The unit being tank shocked suffers D6, Strength 6, AP 4 hits. Yeah. Then carry on with the tank shock as normal. So again, we're getting almost like impact hits. Yeah. But on a 6, the unit being tank shocked suffers 2d6 strength 10 AP2 hits. Then carry on with the tank shock as normal.
Right. Okay.
So let's see.
Let's see what we got here. A 2. Okay.
So we get D6, strength 6, AP4 hits. Do you want to roll the D6 there?
Yep, let's go for it.
4. That's good. And there's 3 more dice.
Okay.
So we need 2s. So we got 3.
So we got 3 hits.
So there, before anything else happens, we've already killed 3 toy. Yeah. Because the AP of the attack is 4, they don't get their cover save. So we've already taken out the front 3. They weren't quick enough. Yep.
Okay.
Now again, with the Thunder Blitz, then you would resolve the tank shock as normal. You would get your chance to death or glory. So you get your EMP attack. I don't know if you would bother.
Against the Baneblade?
Depending on how many hull points, you might get a, but then again, you might not. But you would take your leadership check as normal.
Okay, well, let's roll that and see how we get on. So, leadership check. Oh,
I don't think they like their friends getting squished.
Okay.
So they now fall back 2d6.
Okay, let's see.
And they fall back 7.
7 inches.
So that's probably taking us to... Yeah, just the edge of those
Yeah, it's taken
ruins.
to the edge of the ruins. So.
And then the blade would carry on its movement as normal.
Up to the 9-inch mark that it had declared.
Okay. So it's a wee bit more effective when you've got a super heavy bearing down on you.
It certainly is. It certainly is.
Plus now, those guys are falling back. Oh, they might get to rally next turn, but the Baneblade can still pressurize them on off the table.
Do you know what? It's a fairly effective use of a Baneblade, I've got to say, because all the while you're doing this, that Baneblade can still shoot and do its full shooting phase. So, why wouldn't you use it? It's like an extra weapon, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's basically given a vehicle with no combat stats a chance to kill things.
Are there units that you wouldn't use this technique against because they'd cut you in half?
There are, and we've got a couple of examples here.
Okay.
You wouldn't use it against, well, it's slightly different, but you wouldn't use it against things with very high strength, low AP weaponry. You might not use it against units with meltas.
Yeah.
Again, there's a large risk of getting that explodes result.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't use it, generally things like that there. Leadership check, you can use it against things with high leadership. It's not as effective. You tend to find that they do just end up moving out of the way.
But if your objective is to just move them out of the way, then that doesn't really matter.
Then that's grand. There is one more unit that it is very effective against.
Uh-huh.
And I'll just lift it out here. And this is our immobile gun platform.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason this is so effective against the mobile gun platform, I'll just grab some Orky crew.
Yep.
They've obviously come ashore.
Mm-hmm.
And this time we'll use the Blood Angels Vindicator.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the Vindicator is about to tank shock our crew here.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's, for example, imagine that it is nominating 7 inches.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that takes us right on top of the immobile gun platform.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in the rules, I'll just go back here and state, if some enemy models in the enemy unit would end up underneath the vehicle when it reaches its final position, it makes no difference whether the unit is falling back or not. These models would be moved out of the way by the shortest distance, leaving at least 1 inch between them and the vehicle whilst maintaining unit coherency and staying on the board. Any models that cannot manage this are crushed and removed from play as casualties with no saving throws allowed.
So your static gun platforms
Can't move.
So you just crush them.
So you crush them. You simply, because you don't have to ram them because they have toughness.
Yeah.
Because they're artillery pieces, they've got a toughness of 7, usually a 3-up armor save. But all you do is simply nominate to the point where you're on top of it.
Yep.
You can still come within 1 inch of an enemy model because it's a tank shock and you're allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it cannot be moved.
Mm-hmm.
And it's destroyed. So regardless of what happens to the boys, whether they stay or flee or make a death and glory attack, the weapon that they're manning is removed as a casualty. So it's really handy to get rid of emplacements because, quite frankly, wasting shots on this, you can waste quite a lot of shots on something that's toughness 7 and 3-up armor save.
Yeah.
Particularly if it's behind an Aegis and it's getting a 4+ cover save as well.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's just easier just to drive over it.
Yeah. Right. So sold. Absolutely sold. Right. So, because I was just as you were doing that, I was thinking the number of times I've had effectively useless vehicles. So things like rhinos that are no longer transporting anybody. Maybe later in the game, I'm not hiding in it, and it just kind of putters about. Now I know exactly what I'm going to be looking for to utilize them. Other times I've had Vindicators with weapon destroy.
Yeah.
Which will add no,
and you've still got a front armor 13 vehicle, but it's just got no purpose.
Well, it certainly does now. And with the whole, I haven't played much against the Aegis Defense Line stuff, but I know there's a ton of them out there now. It hadn't occurred to me about the fixed gun emplacement of using it as a means of just dealing with that. It's a guaranteed solution.
Yeah.
There's no
save allowed.
There's no rolling or anything
it's
for
just,
that.
No, it's just is removed from play.
Okay.
Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is tank shock against vehicles, so the rams.
Yeah.
Okay. Rams have changed slightly from 6th edition. Very, very subtle change. Rams used to be based on how far a vehicle travels.
Yeah.
So it used to be you got a strength for every 3 inches that you traveled, and then you added whether you were a tank and things like that there. Now it doesn't matter how far you travel. Okay, it's all about the acceleration.
Yeah.
From within. So in actual fact, it makes it far more worthwhile for the likes of Lemon Russ.
Yeah.
Quite often you'll find Lemon Russ get into trouble in combat. There's not many weapons that take it out from range. There's more D weapons nowadays, but generally you find that they're taken out quite a lot in close combat because they have a very weak rear armor.
Yeah.
However, sometimes when a unit is bearing down on you, the best defense is offense.
Yeah.
So they might be in their transport. They might be just about to get out and assault. So why wouldn't you just
absolutely
use your ram?
Yeah.
Because remember, whenever you're assaulting now, you want to get as close as possible. Because of the random charge distance, you want to kind of engage as most times you want to kind of get as close as possible before assaulting.
Yeah.
So you'll move right up in your Land Raider with the assault ram. Your assault ram will disgorge the troops, and then you'll assault. If the Lemon Russ survives, why not, rather than targeting the squad, target the Land Raider?
Okay, show me how it works then.
Okay, so the ram basically, so we'll start off with our per Vindicator at the front. So the Vindicator's got himself all out of position, and our Lemon Russ has got quite close. Okay, now Lemon Russ do suffer from being heavy vehicles and only being able to really move kind of guaranteed 6 inches.
Yeah.
They can move a wee bit more, but it's kind of not, they're not as effective. So we've got same thing again. We measure, see where we're going to end up. So I'm going to nominate our full 6 inches there.
Yep.
Okay. And I'm going to move up. Now, the one downside to ramming is that it is a bit of a desperate maneuver. It's a bit of a desperate measure. So the driver is concentrating all his effort onto it, and the shooting suffers slightly, so you can only snap fire whenever you ram.
But let's be honest, if you're ramming with a very specific reason in mind. I think shooting is the last thing on my mind right now, So
definitely. So a ram we would make contact with the other vehicle.
Yeah.
And then what happens is we work out what strength we've actually rammed with. Okay. So for every kind of half, so you would take the armor that you're ramming with. So the front armor of a Lemon Russ is 14, and you would divide that in two. Because
so
half the armor value rounding up on the facing that makes impact. Okay, so that would be 7.
Yeah.
Then you would get +1 if the vehicle has the tank type. So if it's just, for example, an Ork truck or something like that, there it doesn't have the tank type, so it just gets its normal strength.
Yeah.
So this would actually get +1. And then excessive mass, so that brings us to strength 8.
Yeah.
Then excessive mass, if the vehicle has the heavy or super heavy type, or is a building, add 2. Okay. Now obviously buildings can't move.
Yeah.
But because they're being rammed, there's also a counter effect as well. So that's where that comes. You're not going to be ramming with your buildings.
Yeah.
So that brings us up. So that brings, well, maybe the new tide wall because it can move. I don't know.
Yeah.
So this brings us up to strength 10.
Because it's got the heavy rule, yeah?
Because it's got the heavy rule. Okay. So if you want to take your dice, sir.
Yep.
You would get a single dice.
I got a single dice.
And you would roll on the vehicle penetration.
3.
3. So strength 10, 11, 12, 13. That beats our side armor on our Vindicator. So that's actually a penetrating hit. So you want to roll again?
Yeah, let's go for it. A 5.
5. No, we don't get any pluses. It doesn't count as having any AP. but that is still a 5, so that I think is a weapon destroyed.
Yeah.
I think so. I'll double check. Yeah, 5's weapon destroyed, 6 is immobilized, and then 7 now is the explodes. So you've actually taken off the one good thing about a Vindicator.
So I've now turned the Vindicator into something that's only worth tank shocking.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly.
pretty much what happens, my Vindicator. So yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what you're saying is, if so something like a Lehman Russ, once it does get surrounded by troops, its days are numbered. Okay, but if it does manage to survive, you're saying ignore the troops and go for the vehicle that disgorged them if you can.
Well, you can do more damage that way, unless, of course, you still have access to all your weapons.
Yeah.
If you still have access to all your weapons, you might have heavy flame responsons. Well, then roast them up, you know.
Yeah.
But if it's a viable option, I would certainly rather take out a 250 point, Land Raider.
Yeah.
Or something like that there than 40 or 50 points of troops.
Fantastic. Well, guys.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, we got one more thing.
If we go back to our Baneblade,
and
we imagine that our Baneblade is ramming.
Yep.
It again gets the Thunderblitz table for. There's a separate table for the ram as well.
A separate table for the Baneblade for the ramming
for the ramming as well. Yeah, so it's very much the same. So before the ram resolves itself, on a 1, no effect. On a 2 to 5, the super heavy vehicle adds D6 to the armor penetration. So that would basically give it 2d6 armor pen. So
yeah,
it's pretty much going to get a penetrating hit. That would, for example, work out at a strength 10 attack. So it would only need 2 on a 2d6 to get a glance. And then flipped. The vehicle being rammed scatters d6 and then explodes.
Yeah.
So basically, if you roll a 6, the vehicle is automatically destroyed and explodes and scatters d6.
Yeah.
So they're pretty good at the old ramming.
That is awesome.
One more thing that's interesting to note is that skimmers can ram tank shock or be rammed as long as they have the tank special rule. So, for example, our friend the Devilfish. So again, there's so many vehicles out there that can actually be used to engage in this way. So it's worth considering. All of your options. Again, it's never going to be a tactic that's game winning. You can't rely on it.
Yeah.
But it's very, very tactical. It's very situational. It's worth remembering and keeping in your arsenal. And it's fun. It certainly adds that, there's been games where I've kind of performed death or glory attacks and saved my squad mates, although the guy might have died, things like that there. There's lots of watercooler moments and lots of cinematics that kind of take place.
Fantastic. Thank you, AJ. Right. Watercooler moments in and around ramming and tank shock. What are your thoughts? Make sure and post them below. Remember, if you've got suggestions or things you'd like to see discussed on the show, email them to myself and AJ at 40kcharted@beastsofwar.com. That's your lot for this one. And we'll see you again soon because we're going to be doing more watercooler moments. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode. Right, so we have a few links up to help you out. Check out the playlist. We also have a subscribe option. And remember, if you subscribe, to click the bell to ding our dong. Finally, if you're into binge watching and you want a whole lot more 40k Charted, come on over to beastsofwar.com, join Backstage, and you get early access to all of the seasons.